Ego and Archetype, Part 11. Alright, so we finished off with the I Ching quote. So it was at the end of their passage. Though the mills of God grind slowly, yet they grind exceeding fine. Alright, so we are up to part 2. So, chapter 3 was still part of part 1, which was encounter with the self. We're up to part 2 now, which is individuation as a way of life. Okay. Start with the quote. The work of human works is to establish in and by means of each one of us an absolutely original center in which the universe reflects itself in a unique and inimitable way. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Chapter 4, The Search for Meaning. Every man's condition is a solution in hieroglyphic to those inquiries he would put. He acts it as life before he apprehends it as truth. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The function of the symbol. One of the symptoms of alienation in the modern age is the widespread sense of meaninglessness. Many patients seek psychotherapy not for any clearly defined disorder, but because they feel that life has no meaning. The thoughtful psychotherapist can scarcely avoid the impression that these people are experiencing the disrupting effects not only of an unsatisfactory childhood experience, but also of an upheaval occasioned by a major cultural transition. We seem to be passing through a collective psychological reorientation equivalent in magnitude to the emergence of Christianity from the ruins of the Roman Empire. Accompanying the decline of traditional religion, there is increasing evidence of a general psychic disorientation. We have lost our bearings. Our relation to life has become ambiguous. The great symbol system, which is organized Christianity, seems no longer able to command the full commitment of men or to fulfill their ultimate needs. The result is a persuasive feeling of meaninglessness and alienation from life. Whether or not a new collective religious symbol will emerge remains to be seen. For the present, those aware of the problem are obliged to make their own individual search for a meaningful life. Individuation becomes their way of life. I use the word meaning here in a special sense. In general, we can distinguish two different usages of the word. Most commonly, the term refers to abstract, objective knowledge conveyed by a sign or representation. Thus, for example, the word horse means a particular species of four-legged animals, or a red traffic light means stop. These are abstract objective meanings conveyed by science. However, there is another kind of meaning, namely subjective, living meaning, which does not refer to abstract knowledge, but of the word we use when we describe, which does not refer to abstract knowledge, but rather to a psychological state which can affirm life. It is this sense of the word we use when we describe a deeply moving experience as something meaningful. Such an experience does not convey abstract meaning, at least not primarily, but rather living meaning which, laden with effect, relates us organically to life as a whole. Dreams, myths, and works of art can convey this sense of subjective living meaning, which is quite different from objective abstract meaning. It is the failure to separate these two different usages of the word meaning which leads one to ask the unanswerable question: what is the meaning of life? The question cannot be answered in this form because it confuses objective, abstract meaning with subjective, living meaning. If we rephrase the question to make it more subjective and ask, what is the meaning of my life? It then begins to have the possibility of an answer. The problem of life meaning is closely related to the sense of personal identity. The question, what is the meaning of my life, is almost the same as the question, who am I? The latter question is clearly a subjective one. An adequate answer can come only from within. Thus, we can say meaning is found in subjectivity. But who values subjectivity? When we use the word subjective, we usually say or imply only subjective, as though the subjective element were of no consequence. Since the decline of religion, we have had no adequate collective sanction for the introverted subjective life. All trends are in the opposite direction. So I'm going to move the mic a little bit lower. Since the decline of religion, we have had no adequate collective sanction for the introverted subjective life. All trends are in the opposite direction. The various pressures of the Western society all subtly urge the individual to seek life meaning in externals and in objectivity. Whether the goal to be the state, the corporate organization, the good material life, or the acquisition of objective scientific knowledge, in each case, human meaning is being sought where it does not exist. Where it does not exist in externals, in objectivity. The unique, particular, not to be duplicated subjectivity of the individual, which is the real source of human meanings, and which is not susceptible to an objective, statistical approach, is the despised stone rejected by the builders of our contemporary world view. Sorry, I'll read that again. The unique, particular, not to be duplicated subjectivity of the individual, which is the real source of human meanings, and which is not susceptible to an objective, statistical approach, is the despised stone rejected by the builders of our contemporary worldview. Even the majority of psychiatrists, who ought to know better, contribute to the prevailing attitude which depreciates subjectivity. Some years ago, I gave a paper concerning the function of symbols before a group of psychiatrists. Afterwards, the discussant gave a critique of the paper. One of his chief objections was that I described the symbol as though it was something real, almost alive, as indeed I had. The criticism reflects a general attitude toward the psyche and subjectivity. The psyche is thought to have no reality of its own. Subjective images and symbols are considered to be nothing but reflections of one's environment and interpersonal relations, or nothing but instinctive wish fulfillments. Harry Stack Sullivan has even made the extreme statement that the idea of a unique individual personality is a delusion. A famous psychiatrist thus becomes unwittingly another exponent of collectivistic mass psychology. Modern man's most urgent need is to discover the reality and the value of the inner subjective world of the psyche, to discover the symbolic life. As Jung has said, man is in need for a symbolic life, but we have no symbolic life. Have you got a corner somewhere in your house, in your houses, where you perform the rites as you can see in India? Even the very simple houses there have at least a curtained corner where the members of the household can lead the symbolic life, where they can make their new vows or meditation. We don't have it. We have no time, no place. Only the symbolic life can express the need of the soul. The daily need of the soul, mind you. And because people have no such thing, they can never step out of this awful, grinding, banal life in which they are nothing but. End of quote. Man needs a world of symbols as well as a world of signs. Both sign and symbol are necessary, but they should not be confused with one another. A sign is a token of meaning that stands for a known entity. By this definition, language is a system of signs, not symbols. A symbol, on the other hand, is an image or representation which points to something essentially unknown, a mystery. A sign communicates abstract, objective meaning, whereas a symbol conveys living, subjective meaning. A symbol has a subjective dynamism which exerts a powerful attraction and fascination on the individual. It is a living, organic entity which acts as a releaser and transformer of psychic energy. We can thus say a sign is dead, but a symbol is alive. Symbols are spontaneous products of the archetypal psyche. One cannot manufacture a symbol, one can only discover it. Symbols are carriers of psychic energy. This is why it is proper to consider them as something alive. They transmit to the ego, either consciously or unconsciously, life energy which supports, guides, and motivates the individual. The archetypal psyche is constantly creating a steady stream of symbolic imagery. Ordinarily, this stream of images is not consciously perceived, except through dreams or through waking fantasy, when the conscious level of attention has been lowered. It's like you're daydreaming. However, there is reason to believe that even in the full waking state, this stream of symbols charged with effective energy continues to flow beyond the notice of the ego. Symbols seep into the ego, causing it to identify with them and act them out unconsciously. Or they spill out into the external environment via projection, causing the individual to become fascinated and involved with external objects and activities. The concretistic and reductive fallacies. The relation between the ego and the symbol is a very important factor. In general, there are three possible patterns of relation between ego and symbol, or, which means the same thing, between ego and archetypal psyche. 1. The ego may be identified with the symbol. In this case, the symbolic image will be lived out concretely. Ego and archetypal psyche will be one. 2. The ego may be alienated from the symbol. Although the symbolic life cannot be destroyed, in this case it will function in a degraded fashion outside consciousness. The symbol will be reduced to a sign. Its mysterious urgencies will be understood only in terms of elementary, abstract factors. 3. The third possibility is the one to be desired. In this instance, the ego, while clearly separated from the archetypal psyche, is open and receptive to the effects of symbolic imagery. A kind of conscious dialogue between the ego and emerging symbols becomes possible. The symbol is then able to perform its proper function as releaser and transformer of psychic energy with full participation of conscious understanding. These different relationships between ego and symbol give rise to two possible fallacies, which I shall call the concretistic fallacy and the reductive fallacy. In the concretistic fallacy, which is the more primitive of the two, the individual is unable to distinguish symbols of the archetypal psyche from concrete external reality. Inner symbolic images are experienced as being real. Wow. Inner symbolic images are experienced as being real. External facts. Examples of this fallacy, that's what I was hoping he was going to give, are the animistic beliefs of primitives, hallucinations and delusions of psychotics, and superstitions of all kinds. I knew it was superstitions. Confused mixtures of psychic and physical reality, such as the practice of alchemy, astrology, and the numerous present-day cults of healing fall into this category. The same fallacy is at work in those religious believers who misunderstand symbolic religious images to refer to literal concrete facts and mistake their own personal or parochial religious convictions for universal and absolute truth. I'll read it again. The same fallacy is at work in those religious believers who misunderstand symbolic religious images to refer to literal concrete facts and mistake their own personal parochial religious convictions for universal and absolute truth. There is danger of succumbing to the concretistic fallacy whenever we are tempted to apply a symbolic image to external physical facts for the purpose of manipulating those facts in our own interests. Symbols have valid and legitimate effects only when they serve to change our psychic state or conscious attitude. Their effects are illegitimate and dangerous when applied in a magical way to physical reality. The reductive fallacy makes the opposite mistake. In this case, the significance of the symbol is missed by misunderstanding it only as a sign for some other known content. The reductive fallacy is based on the rationalistic attitude, which assumes that it can see behind simple symbols to their real meaning. This approach reduces all symbolic imagery to elementary known factors. It operates on the assumption that no true mystery, no essential unknown, transcending the ego's capacity for comprehension, exists. Thus, in this view, there can be no true symbols, but only signs. For those of this persuasion, religious symbolism is no more than evidence of ignorance and primitive superstition. The reductive fallacy is also shared by those psychological theorists who consider symbolism to be no more than the primitive, pre-logical functioning of the archaic ego. We fall into this error whenever we treat our subjective reactions and images in the abstract, statistical manner appropriate to natural science and physical reality. This mistake is the reverse of the preceding one, where a subjective symbolic image was used to manipulate physical facts, thus doing violence to them. Here, the abstract, objective attitude, appropriate for an understanding of outer reality, is applied to the unconscious psyche in an attempt to manipulate it. This attitude does violence to the autonomous reality of the psyche. The conflict between the concretistic fallacy and the reductive fallacy is at the core of the contemporary conflict between the traditional religious view of man and the so-called modern scientific view. And since this is a collective problem, we all carry something of the conflict within ourselves. Concerning this problem, Jung writes, "Whoever talks of such matters as religious symbolism inevitably runs the risk of being torn to pieces by the two parties who are in mortal conflict about these very things. This conflict is due to the strange supposition that a thing is true only if it presents itself as a physical fact. Thus, some people believe it to be physically true that Christ was born as the son of a virgin, while others deny this as a physical impossibility. Everyone can see that there is no logical solution to this conflict and that one would do better not to get involved in such sterile disputes. Both are right and both are wrong, yet they could easily reach agreement if only they dropped the word physical. Physical is not the only criterion of truth. There are also psychic truths which can neither be explained nor proved nor contested in any physical way. If, for instance, a general belief existed that the river Rhine had at one time flowed backwards from its mouth to its source, then this belief would in itself be a fact, even though such an assertion, physically understood, would sound utterly incredible. Beliefs of this kind are psychic facts which cannot be contested and need no proof. Religious or symbolic statements are of this type. They refer without exception to things that cannot be established as physical facts. Taken as referring to anything physical, they make no sense whatsoever. The fact that religious or symbolic statements frequently conflict with the observed physical phenomena proves that, in contrast to physical perception, the symbolic spirit is autonomous, and that psychic experience is to a certain extent independent of physical data. The psyche is an autonomous factor, and religious or symbolic statements are psychic confessions, which in the last resort are based on unconscious processes. These processes are not accessible to physical perception, but demonstrate their existence through the confessions of the psyche. Whenever we speak of religious or symbolic contents, we move in a world of images that point to something ineffable. We do not know how clear or unclear these images, metaphors, and concepts are in respect of their transcendental object. However, there is no doubt that there is something behind these images that transcends consciousness and operates in such a way that the statements do not vary limitlessly and chaotically, but clearly all relate to a few basic principles or archetypes. These, like the psyche itself, or like matter, are unknowable as such. It's end of quote. Carl Jung just answered and solved, honestly, the whole problem of world religion and conflict in world religion. You know, if the masses understood, not just read, they understood what Carl Jung is saying. I'll leave it there.